The day Joseph became a billionaire was the same day his best friend lost his mind, and another died. 3 young men walked into a shrine together, bound by brotherhood and desperation, seeking an escape from the poverty that had choked them since birth. They swore an oath in blood, believing their friendship was strong enough to survive anything. But what Joseph didn't know, what he couldn't have known in that moment of desperate hope, was that the madness he tried to escape would one day return, and when it did, it would take everything from him, his wealth, his sanity, his peace. Everything he had sacrificed his brothers for would crumble like dust in his hands. Some wealth comes with conditions, and some conditions don't expire. They wait, they watch, and when the time is right, they collect. If you believe money should never be worth a human life, tap the like button now, because this story will test everything you think you know about sacrifice, friendship, and the price of escape. There are some friendships that poverty creates, not the kind born from convenience or shared interests, but the kind forged in hunger and shame, in the kind of bone-deep desperation that makes grown men cry in silence. These are the bonds created when you've shared your last piece of bread, when you've slept on the same hard floor, when you've looked into each other's eyes and seen the same fear reflected back, the fear that this is all life will ever be. Joseph, Ethan, and Aid were that kind of brothers. They grew up in the same dusty neighborhood where the sun was always too hot and hope was always too thin, where children went to school without breakfast and came home to even less, where dreams were luxuries only other people could afford, things you saw on television screens and electronic shops you'd never enter, where every day was a battle just to maintain dignity in the face of poverty that stripped you down to nothing. They knew each other's struggles intimately because they were all fighting the same war against a poverty that seemed determined to crush them into the dirt. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. And comment your location below. I want to know where my amazing viewers are watching from. I read every comment, and I will be giving shout-out in my next video. Shout-out to Pinkhood from Los Angeles, Kim from North Carolina, and Eli from London. Now back to the story. Joseph was the calm one, intelligent, observant, the kind of man who thought 3 steps ahead even when he had nowhere to go. He carried notebooks everywhere, their pages filled with ideas that had no funding, business plans that had no capital, futures that had no foundation. He would sit under streetlights at night, writing and calculating and planning, believing that somewhere in those pages was the key to their escape. He was the thinker, the planner, the one who believed hard work and intelligence could eventually break through any barrier. But years had passed, and those notebooks remained full of unfulfilled plans, beautiful strategies that had nowhere to go, dreams that mocked him every time he opened those worn pages. Ethan was the opposite, bold, reckless, always chasing fast money, fast solutions, fast everything. He believed poverty was a cage you could break with enough audacity, enough willingness to take risks that others wouldn't dare. He wasn't afraid of danger or failure. He was afraid of staying still, of waking up at 40 and realizing he'd spent his entire life in the same dusty neighborhood, watching the same sun rise over the same broken dreams. Ethan had tried everything: street trading, motorcycle taxi driving, even some things he wouldn't tell his friends about. He carried a restless energy that made him both inspiring and terrifying, because you never, knew if his next idea would save them all or destroy them completely. And then there was Aid, emotional, loyal, deeply spiritual, the one who prayed before meals even when there was no food on the table, the one who still believed God was listening even when the heavens seemed closed to their cries. He was the conscience of the group, the one who warned them about shortcuts, about desperation, about the things men do when they stop believing in divine intervention. Eddie carried his grandmother's rosary everywhere, and on the hardest nights, you could find him whispering prayers that sounded more like negotiations with God. "Just give us a chance," he would say, "just one real chance to prove ourselves." He was the anchor that kept them tethered to their humanity when poverty threatened to turn them into something else entirely. One night, sitting under the same rusted zinc roof that had sheltered them since childhood, listening to rain pound against metal like judgment from heaven, they made a promise. "If one of us ever escapes this poverty," Joseph said quietly, his voice trembling with something between hope and despair, "he must never forget the others. He must pull the rest up. We don't leave anyone behind." Ethan gripped his shoulder with fierce intensity. "Never. We're brothers. Blood or not, we're brothers." Aid nodded, tears streaming down his face. "We rise together, or we don't rise at all." They meant it. In that moment, with everything they had, they meant every single word. But desperation has a way of rewriting promises. 3 months later, Ethan came to them with news that would change everything. He had heard of a priest, an African priest. Deep in the forest, 3 hours' journey from the city, in a place most people only whispered about after dark. He was known for rituals that could alter destiny itself. People spoke his name with reverence and fear in equal measure. They said he could open doors that were never meant to be opened, that he could change fates that were carved in stone before birth. Joseph hesitated. His notebooks were filled with plans for escape through hard work and time. But Ethan's eyes burned with something wild. "We've prayed, we've worked until our hands bled. Nothing has changed. What else is there to lose?" Ade warned them with everything in him. "Brothers, please, some doors are locked for a reason. Some paths lead to places we can't come back from." But even as he spoke, Aid could see the desperation in their eyes. And he felt it too. Would you risk everything if poverty was choking you? If you've ever felt that kind of desperation, comment yes below. If you believe you'd walk away, comment no. Because what happened next changed all 3 of their lives forever. The journey to the shrine took them through parts of the forest they had never seen before. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Birds stopped singing. The usual sounds of civilization faded until all they could hear was their own breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing down on them with invisible weight. None of them spoke much. They were each lost in their own thoughts, their own fears, their own desperate hopes that this would be the answer they'd been searching for. The shrine was smaller than they expected, just a structure made of mud and thatch that looked like it had been standing for centuries. But inside, it was darker than the fading evening light could account for. Colder, too, despite the tropical heat they'd left just outside. The air tasted like smoke and something ancient, something that had been buried and shouldn't have been dug up. Bones hung from the ceiling. Symbols they didn't recognize covered every surface, painted in substances they couldn't identify. And in the center of it all sat the priest. He didn't look at them when they entered. He simply spoke, his voice low and deliberate, 3 of you have come. Joseph felt his stomach twist. Ethan stepped forward, eager and reckless as always. Aid stayed back, his hands trembling, his lips moving in silent prayer. 3 will enter destiny, the priest continued, his eyes still closed. But only 1 will enjoy it. The words hung in the smoky air like a death sentence. 1 must die. The silence that followed was absolute. 1 will run mad. The air grew heavier still. 1 will become extremely wealthy. Ethan's breath quickened with terrible hope. Joseph's mind raced through possibilities. Aid whispered a prayer that sounded more like a plea for mercy. The priest opened his eyes, and they were darker than the shadows around them. There are no names, he said slowly. There is no choice. Destiny will decide who pays what price. But all 3 must swear the oath. All 3 must enter the gate together, or none of you leave here alive. They looked at each other, and everything passed between them without words. Fear, desperation, hope, guilt, love. The knowledge that they were about to cross a line together that could never be uncrossed. We are brothers, Ethan said finally, his voice shaking but firm. If one of us succeeds, he will care for the others, for their families. We swear it. Joseph nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Aid nodded too, though everything in his spirit screamed that this was wrong. They cut their palms with a blade the priest provided. The pain was sharp and immediate. They pressed their bleeding hands together, their blood mixing, becoming indistinguishable. They spoke the words the priest gave them, words in a language none of them understood, but that resonated in their bones, in their souls, in the deepest parts of themselves, where truth lives beyond comprehension. And then, just as they were about to leave, the priest grabbed Joseph's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes locked onto Joseph's with an intensity that made him want to look away, but couldn't. There is one more thing, whispered, low enough that only Joseph could hear. When the mad one sets eyes on you, the curse will reverse. Joseph's blood ran cold. You must not help him. You must not harm him. You must only avoid him. Do you understand? When his eyes meet yours, when his madness recognizes your sanity, everything will change. The wealth will reverse. The madness will transfer. This is the condition within the condition. Joseph nodded, too terrified to speak. And with that terrible secret burning in his chest, they left the shrine, none of them knowing which fate was theirs, but all of them knowing that nothing would ever be the same. It started the very next morning. Aid woke up laughing. Not the kind of laughter that comes from joy, but something broken, something that sounded like laughter, but felt like screaming. He laughed until he couldn't breathe, until his family rushed into his room in panic, until his lungs burned and his throat was raw. And when they tried to calm him, when his mother grabbed his shoulders and begged him to tell her what was wrong, his eyes were empty, vacant, like Aid had left and something else had moved in. Within 2 days, Aid had completely lost his mind. He screamed at shadows that weren't there, carrying on conversations with people only he could see. He tore at his own skin, leaving scratches that bled because he wouldn't let anyone clean them. He spoke in riddles and fragments, his voice switching between a child's innocent confusion and something much older, much darker. Sometimes he would be calm for hours, sitting perfectly still, then suddenly explode into violence so intense it took 3 grown men to restrain him. His mother wept until she had no tears left, her heart breaking as she watched her son disappear into a darkness she couldn't reach him in. Joseph and Ethan could only watch in horror, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what they had done. They visited Ade's family, brought what little money they had, sat with his mother while she cried. But the guilt was crushing. They knew this wasn't random mental illness. This was the price, one of the 3 prices they had agreed to pay. But the nightmare wasn't finished. Ethan fell ill just days after Ade's madness began. It came suddenly, violently, a fever that wouldn't break, a weakness that spread through his body like poison. The doctors couldn't explain it. They ran tests that showed nothing wrong. The herbalists came with their roots and prayers, but nothing worked. Ethan knew he was dying. You could see it in his eyes during the brief moments of clarity. And in those moments, he would grab Joseph's hand with what little strength he had left and whisper, "Take care of them. Take care of my family. Promise me." And Joseph, tears streaming down his face, would promise. Within 1 week, Ethan was gone, dead at 26 years old. His funeral was small, quiet, the kind of funeral poor people have, where grief is compounded by the indignity of not being able to give your loved one a proper send-off. Joseph stood at the grave, staring at the name carved into cheap wood, and felt something inside him shatter. 2 of his brothers gone, one to madness, one to death, in less than 2 weeks. And he was left standing, the last one, wondering what his fate would be. But even as he buried his friend, something else was happening. His phone kept ringing. During the funeral, during the burial, during the wake, business opportunities appearing out of nowhere. A partnership he didn't apply for, a contract he didn't pitch, money he didn't expect, and it didn't stop. Within 1 month, Joseph's life exploded upward in a trajectory that defied logic. Deals closed overnight, investments multiplied. Doors that had been locked his entire life suddenly swung open. He went from sleeping on a mat to signing checks with more zeros than he'd ever imagined. Poverty was erased, overnight. But so was his peace. Because while Joseph was signing million naira deals in air-conditioned offices, Ade was being chained to a bed to stop him from hurting himself. While Joseph moved into a mansion, Ethan's mother was selling her wrapper to pay for her son's funeral. And Joseph remembered his promise. If you believe no success should be built on another man's suffering, subscribe and hit the like button. Because what Joseph did next will challenge everything you think you know about loyalty and survival. Joseph kept his promise. At least, he kept the parts of it he could keep without endangering himself, without risking the reversal the priest had warned him about. He built houses for Ethan's parents, real houses with proper roofs and floors, not the shacks they had lived in all their lives. He paid Ade's family monthly allowances that were more than most people in their neighborhood made in a year. School fees for all the younger siblings, hospital bills, food, clothing, everything they needed to live with dignity. But there was one thing he wouldn't do, one thing he couldn't do. He wouldn't see Ade. He wouldn't visit. He wouldn't even speak to him during Ade's rare moments of clarity. And this absence created a wound in Ade's family that money couldn't heal. Ade's mother came to Joseph's office one day, looking small and out of place in the gleaming lobby. "Please, Joseph," she begged, her voice breaking. "Come and visit him, just once. Maybe if he sees you, he will remember. You were like brothers. Maybe your presence is the medicine he needs." Joseph's throat tightened. His hands went cold. I can't," he said, hating how weak his voice sounded. "Why?" she cried, frustration and pain spilling over. "Why won't you help him? You help everyone else. You send money. You pay for everything. But you won't come see him. What kind of man does that? What kind of friend?" And Joseph had no answer he could give her. No way to explain that he was following rules she didn't know existed. The priest's words haunted him every single day. "When the mad one sets eyes on you, the curse will reverse." What did that mean exactly? Would Joseph lose his wealth and gain Adie's madness? Would they switch places completely? He didn't know, and the uncertainty was almost worse than any definite answer could have been. So Joseph sent money instead of himself. He sent the best doctors, specialists who flew in from other countries. He sent everything except his presence, except the one thing Adie's family wanted most. And slowly, Adie's family began to resent him. "You gave us money," Adie's brother said, bitterly, one day, confronting Joseph outside his office. "But you abandoned our brother. What kind of man uses money as a substitute for love?" Joseph had no answer. His businesses continued to grow. His wealth multiplied. But guilt grew with it. Every time his phone rang with good news, he thought of Ade screaming in a dark room. Every time he signed a new contract, he thought of Ethan's grave. And every time he looked in the mirror, he saw a man who had escaped poverty but couldn't escape himself. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please click subscribe and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now let's continue. But there was one night, one terrible night, when Joseph almost broke the rule. It was 3 years after the shrine. 3 years of sending money and avoiding visits. 3 years of guilt compounding like interest on an unpayable debt. Ade's mother had called him earlier that day, her voice desperate. "He's getting worse, Joseph. Much worse. The doctors say he might not survive another episode like the last one. Please, if you ever cared about him, come see him, just once." Joseph had said no, like always, but this time the guilt followed him home. It sat beside him at dinner. It kept him awake at night. At 2 a.m, Joseph got into his car. He didn't plan it, didn't think it through. He just started driving, through empty streets, through neighborhoods that got progressively poorer, until he found himself outside Ade's family compound, the same compound he used to visit freely before the shrine, before everything changed. He sat in his expensive car, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He could see the window of Ade's room, a dim light burning inside. He imagined walking through that gate, knocking on that door, looking into his brother's eyes. Maybe it would help. Maybe seeing each other would bring Ade back. Maybe the priest was wrong. Maybe love was stronger than curses. His hand reached for the door handle, but then he remembered the priest's eyes, the certainty in his voice. "When the mad one sets eyes on you, the curse will reverse." And Joseph thought about what that meant, not just for him, losing his wealth, descending into madness, but for everyone depending on him. Ethan's parents in their new house, Ade's siblings in school, the employees he'd hired, the charities he funded. If he lost everything, what would happen to them? Was one moment of connection worth all of that? Joseph pulled his hand back. He put the car in reverse, and he drove away. He never told anyone about that night, but it haunted him more than any nightmare could. Because in that moment, he realized something terrible. He wasn't avoiding Ade to protect himself from madness. He was avoiding Ade to protect the life he'd built on his brother's suffering. And there was no amount of money that could wash away the shame of that truth. Was Joseph selfish when he avoided Ade, or was he just trying to survive? Comment your thoughts below. Years passed. Joseph became one of the most successful men in the city. His name in newspapers, his face on billboards, his success story told as inspiration. People called him self-made, a genius, proof that anyone could rise with enough dedication. If only they knew. If only they could see him at night, alone in his mansion that felt more like a prison, drinking expensive whiskey that tasted like ashes, trying to drown memories that wouldn't fade and guilt that wouldn't dissolve. He attended charity galas and gave speeches about giving back, all while avoiding the one person from his community who needed him most. The hypocrisy was suffocating. But he told himself it was necessary, that he was doing more good with his wealth than he could do by risking it, that his choice, however painful, was the logical one, the responsible one. He almost believed it. And then one night, everything changed. Aid escaped. No one could explain how. The chains were still locked, the doors still bolted, the windows too small. But somehow, Aid got out and wandered through the night, barefoot and disheveled, muttering and laughing and crying. He walked through streets that no longer recognized him, past neighbors who crossed to the other side, past children who threw stones. And something, fate or destiny or the curse itself, led him straight to Joseph. Joseph was at a charity event in the city center. His PR team had insisted it would be good for his image. "Show the people you care," they said. Joseph didn't want to go. Something felt wrong that day, a tightness in his chest he couldn't explain. But he went anyway, because that's what successful people do. They ignore their instincts. The event was crowded with cameras and journalists and politicians. Joseph moved through it mechanically, shaking hands and posing for photos. And then security brought in a man, dirty, disheveled, restrained. Someone had found him wandering near the venue and thought it would be good publicity to help him on camera. Joseph's assistant turned to him. "Sir, they want you to personally hand him some money for the photo opportunity." Joseph froze. Because even from a distance, even though the man was thinner and older, he recognized something familiar. His heart started hammering. His mouth went dry. It was Aid. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and in that instant, the world contracted to just the two of them. Everything else, the cameras, the crowd, the journalists, faded into nothing. Aid's eyes, which had been vacant just moments before, suddenly cleared. The madness receded like a tide going out, revealing the person underneath. Just for a moment, just long enough for recognition to flash between them like lightning. "Joseph," Aid whispered. And then something shifted in the air, something invisible but tangible. The curse began to reverse. Joseph collapsed right there in front of everyone. His body hit the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Cameras flashed. People screamed. Someone called for an ambulance while others pressed forward, creating chaos. When Joseph woke up in the hospital, hours later, surrounded by the best doctors money could buy, they couldn't explain it. No stroke, no heart attack, no neurological event. All his tests came back normal. But Joseph knew better, because while the doctors were checking his vitals, he could feel something changing inside him, something shifting in the foundation of his reality. The curse had reversed. Within 1 week, things started to fall apart, but not all at once, not dramatically. At first, it seemed manageable. His biggest deal, a multi-million-dollar contract, hit a snag. Just a small delay, his lawyer said. Nothing to worry about. Technical issues with permits. It would be resolved within days. Joseph tried to believe them. Then one of his accounts showed irregularities. The bank apologized profusely. System glitches. They'd fix it immediately. Joseph's hand shook as he hung up the phone, but he told himself it was coincidence. Just bad luck. It would pass. For 3 days, there was hope. The deal looked like it might go through after all. His lawyers were optimistic. The bank claimed they'd resolved the issues. One doctor even told him his collapse was probably just stress and dehydration. Nothing serious, nothing to worry about. Joseph allowed himself to breathe. Maybe the curse wasn't as absolute as he'd feared. Maybe he'd get through this. Maybe there was a way to save both his wealth and his sanity. But then everything crashed. All at once. Like the universe had been holding its breath and finally exhaled destruction. The deal didn't just delay. It canceled completely. No reason given. No explanation. Just a brief email. We're pursuing different opportunities. His lawyers were baffled. The contract was ironclad. His accounts didn't just show irregularities. They froze. Millions locked away behind walls of bureaucracy. His partners pulled out of ventures without warning. Investors disappeared. Connections stopped returning his calls. It was like watching his entire rise in reverse, but faster, crueler, more complete. Everything he had built over years was crumbling in weeks. And worse, he started hearing things, whispers when no one was there. Voices murmuring in languages he didn't understand. Shadows moved in his peripheral vision. His thoughts scattered more easily. Sometimes he'd start a sentence and forget what he was saying mid-word. The madness was coming for him. And Aid? Aid's mind came back. Slowly at first, like someone waking from a very long nightmare. Then more fully, memories flooding back in painful waves. He remembered everything. The shrine, the oath, the moment the madness descended. He remembered years lost, fragments of terrible things he'd said and done. And he remembered Joseph. Remembered the brotherhood they'd shared. Remembered the promise they'd made. He went to Joseph's house as soon as he was strong enough, his legs still shaky, his body thin. Joseph's guards tried to turn him away, but Ade pushed through. "Joseph!" he cried when he finally saw his friend, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what was happening to me. But I'm back now. Let me help you. Please, tell me how I can help." But Joseph couldn't even look at him directly, because now Joseph was the one unraveling. Ade fell to his knees in Joseph's driveway. "We swore an oath, Joseph. We promised to take care of each other. Brothers. Remember? Let me help you." But Joseph could only shake his head, backing away, fear written across his face. Because destiny doesn't negotiate. Because some wheels, once set in motion, can't be stopped. In the end, Ethan was gone forever, his grave overgrown with weeds, his name fading from the cheap wooden marker. Aid was sane again, but traumatized by years he couldn't fully remember. He woke up screaming sometimes, fragments of his madness still haunting his dreams. He carried guilt for things he'd done while his mind wasn't his own. The years he'd lost could never be reclaimed. And Joseph? Joseph lost everything. The wealth evaporated, the status crumbled, the empire collapsed. But worse than the material losses was the loss of his mind, the feeling of his sanity slipping away like sand through fingers. One day, as Joseph sat alone in what used to be his mansion, now emptying out as possessions were sold to pay mysterious debts. He heard footsteps. The priest stood in the doorway, looking exactly the same as years ago. "You thought you could cheat it," the priest said quietly. Joseph didn't respond. "You thought if you gave money, if you kept your distance, if you followed the rules I gave you, you could have both. Wealth and peace, success without sacrifice." The priest knelt down, looking Joseph in the eyes. "But you cannot cheat destiny, Joseph. You can only delay it. The curse was always going to complete its cycle. The balance was always going to be paid." "Then what was the point?" Joseph whispered, tears streaming down his face. "What was any of it for?" The priest's face showed something that might have been compassion. "The point was the choice you never made. You chose wealth over brotherhood, safety over sacrifice, rules over love. You could have broken the condition. You could have seen aid, risked the reversal while you still had the wealth to cushion it. But you chose to protect what you had instead of protecting who you loved. And now you know the weight of that choice." "But the curse," Joseph started to protest. The priest shook his head. "The curse gave you conditions, not commands. It told you what would happen, not what you had to do. Every day you chose not to see aid was a choice you made. You hid behind my warning like it was a law, but it was only information. You always had free will. You just didn't want to use it." And then he was gone, leaving Joseph alone with the truth. He had been given choices all along, and he had chosen wrong. Not because he was forced to, but because he was afraid. A day came to visit Joseph regularly after that. He brought food. He sat with him during episodes of confusion. He tried to care for Joseph the way Joseph had once cared for his family. But Joseph's mind was too far gone. He muttered. He laughed. He cried, just like Aid had done years before. The curse had come full circle. In the end, Joseph escaped poverty. He had everything he'd ever dreamed of. But he couldn't escape the price. Because some debts aren't paid with money. Some debts are paid with everything you are. So I ask you, if you were Joseph, would you have broken the rule to save your friend, even if it meant losing everything? Or would you have protected your wealth? Comment below. Tell me honestly. Because this isn't just a story. It's a question we all face in different forms. When does loyalty end and survival begin? When does protecting yourself mean abandoning others? And when the price comes due, will you be ready to pay it? If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel. We tell African stories where destiny always collects its debt, where choices have consequences that echo through generations. Hit the notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, wealth is not the enemy. But the way you get it, that will follow you forever. Thank you for watching. May your choices bring you peace, not just prosperity.